Welcome back and thank you for staying with us. Now we move to Uganda, where the country has actually marked 62 years of independence from British rule. President Yoweri Museveni highlighted economic progress in sectors like autos, vaccine, and computing. However, Ugandans face challenges like unemployment, economic stagnation, corruption, and political repression. Many criticize the 38-year ruling party for declining institutions, social erosion, and inequality. They seek true independence through freedom of expression, democratic participation, and better governance. Now joining us live is Isaac Otimgiu to speak to us on this. He's a member of Parliament, Padyere County, Nebi District, reaching us all the way from Kampala. Thank you so much for joining us, Isaac.
Good evening.
And a happy independence to you, by the way.
Thank you very much.
Yes, so,
Thank you very much. It was great. Yes, we had a lovely independence. We are happy to be 62 years old since independence. Yes.
It's beautiful. All right, so can you just briefly give us an idea of how Uganda has transitioned, since independence, and what are the challenges that actually abound at the moment?
Thank you very much. Yes, I think so. We go back to the pre-colonial time. The factors were actually not all in place. After independence in 1962, Uganda went through a very dark age. We had a number of coups. We didn't have a stable government, right from Idi Amin coming to Obote's regime. So conditions were not favorable for Uganda to actually uplift its economic transformation, because we had a number of coups, we had a number of wars and change in government. And that actually affected our economic growth very much. But since the NRM government came into power in 1986, the GDP at that time was just about $3 billion US. But right now, in 2024, we are talking of an economy, GDP of about 53 billion US dollars. So that is quite a big increase. We can clearly see that the post-wars after independence, the unstable regimes after independence actually affected the country's growth. And that is why the population was left behind, and we lagged behind in terms of economic growth after independence at the time.
Okay, you say you lag behind in terms of economic growth, but President Yoweri Museveni is actually saying, or has said, that Uganda is on track to advance in many fields. Is this true? Do you agree?
Yes, absolutely. I think actually the NRM has transformed Uganda. It has put Uganda back on the track of socio-economic transformation. When the NRM government came into power, it had actually 4 principles, which included patriotism, but most of the emphasis was put on socio-economic transformation, making sure that money was put back in the pockets of Ugandans, because without capital amongst the population, then there will be no way to drive the economy. And that is what the NRM government under Yoweri Museveni has managed to do. There are lots of projects which have come up to make sure that money comes back into the hands of the people so they can reinvest it, which will translate into GDP. There are programs which have been introduced by the NRM government. For example, the parish development model, whereby every parish in Uganda, almost all the 10,000 plus parishes in Uganda are helped with almost 100 million Uganda shillings per year. That is given to over 100 people. And the biggest problem that we had at that time also was, before the NRM regime, was that most of the farmers were in subsistence agriculture, and that's where the problem was. Food was mainly grown for use at home and for eating. But the NRM government has come to transform, whereby now people need to grow food, not only for eating, but also for making a living. And that is why President Yoweri Museveni has introduced a number of models. There's a model now we are transforming the country with, which is a 4-acre model, whereby people who have 4 acres are able to grow a certain type of crops which can actually transform their livelihood. So yes, the president is right. The country is in the right track. We have a number of industries right now. Industrialization has actually been boosted. We have a lot of industrial parks which are actually employing so many Ugandans. And the oil sector. The oil sector is another sector which is going to really transform this economy. We are going to be getting over almost over 150,000 barrels from the end of next financial year in the two oil wells which are in the western part of this country.
Okay.
And that is a big investment. I think the president was right to say that the transformation is there and Uganda is actually in the right track. We have moved. This is actually going not only to boost Uganda because we have invested with the Tanzanian government. There is an oil pipe under ECOP and it's going to move all the way to the Indian Ocean.
All right, now let's quickly touch on politics now, because I read somewhere that NRM has presided over a period where the promise of independence has often given way to stagnation and decline. Now, to you, or in your opinion, what impact has the NRM's 38 rule had on Uganda's political landscape? And then we'll come back to, you know, the extent of freedom of expression and also democratic participation.
I think actually a lot has transformed. The NRM regime has opened politics for so many other people. For example, multipartyism was introduced in 1994, which has actually allowed so many other parties to come into play. And that is actually a positive step because we believe that this is all our country and the views must be respected from all political parties. There is freedom of expression. In Uganda, there's freedom of speech. Political parties are allowed to actually hold all their meetings and they have a majority in party. For example, in Kampala, where I am right now, the majority of the members of parliament and even in local government is actually opposition under the National Unity Platform, and that is within the city. So actually that shows that the political landscape of Uganda has come a very long way. From the time of Idi Amin, whereby opposition members were actually all arrested, opposition members were actually brutally killed. Right now we have people in place, we have politicians in place who are able to come out and express their views and move around the country in a way in which they can, as long as they do not cause public disorder. So I think the political landscape is actually in a positive track within the NRM government, and we are happy that the president has actually announced that he will be on the ballot paper again in 2026, and I think it's still not that old to continue ruling.
You know, what you say is actually quite the opposite of you know, so many what so many people are actually saying and what I have read so far. But you know, since you say that freedom of expression and democratic participation is not stifled and not met, you know, with repression by the government, then I will say is actually a good thing. But you know, how can democratic institutions, you know, be strengthened, you know, some more? Since you say, you know, everything is good now, how much more? What can be done to strengthen democratic institutions?
No, I actually believe that we have a constitution that all of us are aligned to, both the political power in the regime, the national resistance movement, and the opposition. And a number of times why you do see a number of arrests or a number of stops are made is because of public disorder. I think actually that most of the political parties, once they go through the proper channels and request for permission to hold public rallies, then there's usually nothing that can happen. Yes, we still have a long way to go. We still have a lot of things that we can change to actually align ourselves with true democratic institutions. And I think it comes up to sensitization of the voters. Voters need to be sensitized to know their rights as voters, to know what they're actually supposed to be looking for from their leaders. And that is another issue that we need a mindset change. And democratic change will come from sensitizing the public. The general public needs to be sensitized more so that they can participate in politics. Right now, actually, in Uganda, we only have a very small number of people who actually participate actively during voting. Actually, during voting turnout, the crowds are not that big, and those are things that we need to improve. We need to make sure that Ugandans understand that it is their right. They have to come out and participate in order their country can actually be built.
All right, now, in as much as you say that 67% of Ugandans, you know, are involved in money economy, there's no it's still believed that poverty is still very, very much high in Uganda. I don't know if you agree with that. Poverty, unemployment is quite high in Uganda. So what policy interventions can address these challenges, considering I'm talking about poverty, and also how can Uganda ensure access to some essential and basic services like healthcare and the rest?
Yeah, no, it is true. We still have some unemployment problem. But on top of that, I think we are progressing on a positive way. The government of Uganda has come up with a number of interventions in place. Like I mentioned earlier, we've got the parish development model, we've got yoga models, and we also have a number of projects under World Bank. For example, one is called the GROW, whereby women entrepreneurs are actually supported with grants and small interest loans. All that is to try and empower the local community. So I do feel that we are not on a very bad projection. Okay. Uganda can actually still come up. The most important bit that the government has actually done is to try and make sure that there is population participation in driving the GDP of this country. And the only way that can be done is to make sure that money is in the pockets of the people so they can invest that money. And that is where the government is putting a lot of emphasis.
And that was why I was actually about to ask about the wealth gap, since you talked about, empowering the populace, considering that, the population, most of the population is actually poor. How has the economic growth been distributed among the population between the affluent and also the impoverished Ugandans? Just as you have said, money should be in the hands of every Ugandan.
Well, as per this financial year, our GDP, like as I mentioned, has now grown to over 50 billion US dollars, and the GDP per capita has now reached the middle status. So we are officially a middle status income country, and on top of that, that means that we must be having at least enough money among us, our people. But yes, you are right. The distribution of wealth is still, there's still big gaps in those areas. There's still inequality in terms of distribution of wealth within the country. And that's where some of the government intervention is going right straight into the population. When I talk about the parish development model that I talked about, that is 100 million Uganda shillings going straight into the population, right into the parishes, whereby every individual is getting about 1 million Uganda shillings to help them boost their incomes, to invest into whatever they have to do, mainly through agriculture. So what the government is trying to do is that there is no middleman, so that money goes through them to try and uplift them. 38% of the population was actually were in subsistence farming, and they're only operating in agriculture model whereby they only work for their stomach, which was a problem. And that is why the NRM government has come in to make sure that money now, they do not only work for food within the home, but otherwise the money they work for can help them with their families so that they can generate part of their incomes to educate their families, to access healthcare. And in terms of healthcare, you mentioned it rightly so. We have now a number of healthcares. We have Uganda has moved at least whereby every person is not beyond 5 kilometers to the nearest healthcare. Okay. And I think that is moving towards a proper direction of healthcare.
All right, you've spoken so positively. We do hope that Uganda progresses and also becomes one of the strongest economies in Africa. And once again, happy independence to you.
Thank you very much. I do appreciate that.